With the news of Sean Manaea's setback, the New York Mets need a true ace more than ever. Did Kodai Senga show us enough on Tuesday night to believe he is ready to step back in that role? I'll talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, Tuesday was a rough loss for the New York Mets, and in a lot of ways, it was self-inflicted. You had Francisco Lindor, who made two errors in the game, the second of which cost Kodai Senga a couple of unearned runs. You had Mark Vientos dogging it down the line at one point on a play where, in retrospect, or in hindsight for him, he could have beaten it out because Graham Pauley did not come up with the ball cleanly. It was an opportunity for Vientos to get on, and he is 2 for 19 on the season, has not had a ton of success. It would have been a chance to maybe start some type of a rally, but instead he gets thrown out, looks ugly on that play. And a day after the Mets had scored 10 runs and hit, 4 or 5 home runs, they only scored 2 runs, one of them on a solo homer by Brandon Nimmo, his second consecutive night with a homer. The other one, an RBI single from Francisco Lindor, his first hit of the season, driving in Luis Angel Acuna, who led off that third inning with a ground rule double. He advanced to third base on a nice piece of hitting by Jose Siri, who hit a ground ball to the right side to get him over, and then Lindor gets that base hit. But the Mets couldn't do anything after that. Pete Alonso had a chance with a runner in scoring position in that same inning as Lindor stole second base, but he did not come through. Ninth inning, Pete Alonso got another chance as Juan Soto led off the inning with a walk, but Pete nearly hits into a double play ball. He was lucky that there was a bad throw and he was safe at first base, but the Mets still couldn't do anything with him even after Brandon Nimmo had gotten a hit to put a couple runners on. Vientos ended up getting out. Jesse Winker ended the game. It was just a really rough night for the Mets lineup. And of course, those errors by Lindor are always surprising. And this one ultimately cost the Mets a couple of runs. But I felt like, for me, I was watching this game primarily to see what Kodai Senga looked like. Like, that was my huge focus of the day. I had the opportunity, if I wanted to go down to Miami, but the more I thought about watching Senga and Sandy, as great as it is when you're in person for one of those matchups, if you really want to see the stuff and how it's moving, you're almost better off watching it from home, seeing from that, center field, camera angle right behind the pitcher, seeing how the pitches are moving. And I'll also be honest, I just didn't feel like driving down to Miami. Maybe it's my fault. Blame me. I will be there on Wednesday, so maybe I can bring some of that good luck back and the Mets can win the series. But what I noticed from Kodai Senga early on, felt like he was tentative, and I was a little concerned about that fastball command as the first two guys that he faced, he leaves fastballs with so much plate. For Xavier Edwards, up in the zone, he crushes a double. Kyle Stowers might as well have just brought out a tee and placed it for him because he threw one 93 miles per hour right down the pipe that Kyle Stowers crushed for a 2-run homer. But from that point on, those are really the only 2 mistakes that Kodai Senga made. He settled in from there, struck out 5 batters across the second and third inning, 2 in the second, struck out 3 in the third. Fourth inning is when Lindor's error cost him. He had a ground ball that was hit to Lindor to start out the inning that ends up being the error. Senga then has a strikeout, gets another ground ball, but it wasn't hit hard enough to turn 2. Then he walked a batter, gave up a double that drove in a couple of runs. Senga said after the game it was his fault for not picking up Lindor. And granted, he certainly had the opportunity to. I wish he had attacked, was it Jonah Bride? I think is his name. I wish he attacked him instead of walking him. He was ahead, tried to throw a couple of ghost forks. Didn't work out. That led to the walk. And then again, the double that scored the 2 runs. But he got a strikeout to get out of that inning, hit a clean 5th inning, 1-2-3 with a strikeout to end the frame. You look at the line at the end of the game, 5 innings pitched, 3 hits allowed, 4 runs, 2 of them earned, 1 walk, 8 strikeouts, got up to 77 pitches. The fastball got stronger as the night went on, eventually touched 97 with that fastball. So the velocity sort of built up as he went. He looked more and more comfortable. That ghost fork was dancing on hitters. They really struggle with it. I thought Kodai Senga looked very good considering the fact that this was his first regular, fully stretched out start in a big league game since July of last year. And July of last year, that one start was the only one he made that entire year. So really, it's his first time stretched out, feeling normal and good, ready to be a big part of this rotation since the end of 2023. It's a long layoff for him. I thought he threw the ball well, and I was encouraged for what that could mean for the Mets moving forward. And we'll talk about that a bit in the next segment. But I also got to give a shout out to Max Kranick, who came in after Kodai Senga and was absolutely brilliant. What do you need when you're down a couple of runs and you want to maybe save some of the high leverage arms for the final game of the series? You need a guy to just throw strikes, and Max Kranick went out there, pounded the strike zone. His stuff is good enough that against a bad Marlins lineup, he just pitched to contact and ate up innings. 3 innings pitched for Max Kranick out of the bullpen. Perfect, by the way. 9 up, 9 down, 1 strikeout. He needed 22 pitches to get 9 outs, 17 strikes thrown of those 22 pitches. That is going on attack. He is going to be a big, big part of this team. But as is Kodai Senga, and with the news of Sean Manaea being set back to potentially June, the Mets need Senga to be their ace, but also they're running out of depth. How will the Manaea injury impact the Mets rotation? I want to talk about that, or the re-injury, I guess I should say. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. First, though, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? We'll crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you feel fuller, longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety, and I am kicking myself because I was at the grocery store today, and what was the one thing I forgot? I forgot to get my Wonderful Pistachios, and I was a little hungry before the show, and I didn't have any, and I'm jonesing for them, and I got to correct that tomorrow. So maybe I can drive down to the ballpark and snack on Wonderful Pistachios. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack. I love smoky barbecue. I also like the honey roasted flavor, but there's salt and vinegar. There's so much more. And you also can get the in-shell variety if you are looking for that satisfying crunch of opening every single shell. You can get those as well. Get snacking and cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. Let's talk about Sean Manaea's setback here. So apparently he was throwing long toss and he felt more pain in his oblique. They got him another MRI and it showed inflammation. And so he was shut down again and he was given a PRP injection. Now, I don't believe he got an injection the first time that he went down with this oblique. So this is something that will hopefully, calm all that inflammation, help him recover. And when he ramps up again, hopefully that muscle does not act up anymore. But obliques can be really tricky. And so it's tough to know when Sean Manaea is going to return. Best case scenario, he rests for 2 weeks. The injection works wonders and magic. He starts throwing again. He builds up to long toss. Everything is fine. He gets into, some live BPs. He maybe gets some minor league rehab games. He builds up. Maybe it takes 6 weeks. He starts throwing on April 15th, which would be 2 weeks from yesterday, from Tuesday. Then all of a sudden, the 6-week ramp up could have him good to go on May 27th. But that is everything working out completely perfect. No setbacks. No, let's give it 1 more weeks. No, let's have him spend a little more time in the minor leagues ramping up. That is if everything's perfect. So the reality is Sean Manaea is probably not going to come back until June, and there is a chance that Frankie Montas might beat him back now. All of a sudden, it's funny how things look in retrospect because Luis Severino is out there carving for the Athletics. Maybe they invested in the wrong one, which I hate to say. It's not fair to Manaea. It's an injury. I still think he's going to be great when he comes back, but that's just the reality of baseball. And we can put teams on paper at the beginning of the season and think everything's going to work out great in spring training. Oh, how are all these starting pitchers going to factor into the rotation for the Mets? And all of a sudden, it's like, man, maybe they should have kept Budo stretched out because this team is getting thin. And we'll talk about how things can go wrong a little bit more in the next segment because the Braves will make you feel a little bit better about some of the Mets struggles with what's going on with them. But now you look at this rotation, this group that we thought was maybe temporary on opening day, and we were hoping, all right, Manaea comes back at the end of April, if everything goes right. Well, now this rotation is going to be the Mets rotation moving forward. And that's not even to account for the fact that any of these guys could always go down. But this is your squad. And so now you look at the frontline options for this team. It's the two guys we've seen in this series, Kodai Senga and David Peterson. And then you're hoping that Clay Holmes can showcase some of that upside that we saw in spring training in the final game of the series and moving forward. But this rotation at the very top, it's got questions. I feel good about Canning and McGill. They look great. I think the depth is still fine. But if you want that ace to be the stopper every fifth or sixth day, to be the guy that can go out and win you a series and can battle the best pitchers in baseball, like we saw Senga go up against Sandy Alcantara tonight, you need a guy to fill that role, and Senga is the guy. And what we saw in this start tonight is still a guy that has life on his fastball, still a guy that has one of the nastiest pitches in the game with his ghost fork, and a guy that has the ability to throw that cutter and get weak contact. He did a great job of that. He mixed in 3 different breaking balls. If you look at the pitch data, a sweeper, a slider, and a registered curveball, which very well could have just been more sweepers. But this is a guy with an accomplished pitch mix who, really does have the stuff to be one of the best pitchers in baseball. And if he stays healthy and he gets in a rhythm, we saw what he can do in 2023 when he made 29 starts and he pitched to a 2.98 ERA and he struck out over 200 and 100, I think it's 166 and 2/3 innings pitched. Like, he has that ability in there. And the Mets have him stretched out to 77 pitches. Maybe he adds on a little bit more next time, maybe a little bit more after that. And at some point, hopefully you get him to 100 pitches, to 110, and you have him pitch once a week on that, Japan-like schedule, pitching, on 5 days rest every single time. And you hope to get an ace performance every 6th day. And then you have to figure out the days in between. And that's where David Peterson comes in, which I still feel great about. Peterson continue to be a bulldog of a competitor, a guy that's going to eat up innings. I'm curious how Holmes is going to continue to progress. Like I said, I feel good about Canning and McGill right now as back-end options for the Mets. But at some point, they are going to need a 6th starter to keep Kodai Senga on 5 days rest. So who is that? At this point, the hope is Paul Blackburn comes off the IL and at the minimum, as soon as he's eligible or a little bit after that, when he can make that start at the Mazzolino on April 18th, the first time that Senga would have to go on 4 days rest if they didn't slide in a 6th starter. So that is the target date for Blackburn to come back from this knee inflammation that he got an injection for. Hopefully he comes back and he doesn't deal with any more injuries, because he's certainly starting to get sort of a track record here of being a little bit more of an injury-prone pitcher. And so you got to see what Blackburn can give you. But at times, he didn't even look great in spring. So now you look at the depth of this rotation, and it could get thin quick. I feel good about the 5 guys they have in there now, and I'm curious to see what Blackburn looks like. But what happens if Blackburn has a setback? Where do you go? The one thing that I did tonight is I tried to count out how many starts until June would you need that 6 starters for. So April 18th is one, April 30th is another, May 6th is a third one. Then there's enough off days in May and how Senga's spot would line up. You wouldn't need one until June, basically. So let's say Blackburn has a setback. or somebody else goes out and Blackburn replaces them. The Mets could get away with a 5-man rotation, keeping the 3 long men in their bullpen and having bullpen days. Max Kranick gave you 3 innings tonight. Brazaban gave you 2 innings the night before. We know Jose Budo can give you 2 plus. You can maybe have a couple of those guys ready to throw for one of those games and go with a bullpen game and try to get through it. Or you're going to have some opportunities that might open up for, I think Justin Hageman is on the roster. Not that he's looked very good. He got knocked around in spring training and then again in his AAA debut. But he's an option. And then, you got to look, if you're Brandon Sproat and Blade Tidwell, and see the Mets rotation and realize you got an opportunity, and you might have more of an opportunity now early in the season than you have when Manaea and Montas come back, and that rotation looks a little bit full. Not to mention, the Mets very well could add a pitcher at the deadline. I'll tell you, Sandy looked good tonight. I would not mind the Mets swinging that in-division trade, although I don't know if I'd want to pay the in-division tax on a guy that's already going to have incredible trade value, but that's a conversation for another day. This rotation could become thin very quick. They've had enough depth to deal with the loss of Montas and Manaea, and even to a certain extent Blackburn, but it could get a little bit dicey. So the hope is, for one, the 5 guys you got stay healthy. Blackburn can return and you have no issues until you get a Manaea or a Montas back, or one of Sproat or Tidwell can make a spot start here or there and impress. The other option, again, is some bullpen games. But I do feel confident in Kodai Senga being the Mets ace. I feel good about David Peterson, and I am very interested in what we're going to continue to see from Holmes, McGill, and Canning. But for now, this rotation is definitely a question mark. Funny enough, no, the offense has been a bigger issue so far. So, you never really can tell what's going to be the thing that costs you games. Hopefully, Clay Holmes gives the Mets a good start on Wednesday, and the offense can revert back to that Monday performance and put up a lot of runs on not the Marlins A's. It's Connor Gillespie that's going to be throwing on Wednesday. So it should be a little bit of an easier matchup for the Mets to pile on some runs. But if you want to feel a little bit better about the Mets, maybe you look at the division rival Atlanta Braves. I want to talk about everything going on in Atlanta to close out the show. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all the money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, and your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you can stop just managing your money. You can start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track your shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, and you get the lineup graphic sent to your phone every day so you know the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, the Atlanta Braves are 0-6 to start the season, so they have started off the year worse than the Mets did last year. This is after losing their second game in a row to the Dodgers. They have one more game against them today. That'll close off a brutal West Coast trip for them to start off the year, where they had to play 4 in San Diego and then 3 in LA. The Braves have scored 2 runs in their last 4 games. They've scored 9 runs all season through 6 games. You look at their leading hitter in terms of batting average, it's Nick Allen, who's hitting .286 because he's 2 for 7. If you look at the guys that have been in the lineup every day who have gotten over 10 at-bats, Marcelo Zuna is leading the charge with a .214 average. He has walked 10 times, so he's gotten on base at a .542 clip, so his numbers overall aren't terrible. Matt Olson has drawn his walks as well. He's gotten on base at a 375 clip despite hitting 167. The next highest OPS on the Braves, because those two guys are over 600. I think Ozuna's over 700. The next highest guy is Ozzie Albies at 481. This team has not gotten anything from their offense. And remember when I was advocating for the New York Mets to look into signing Jurickson Profar over the offseason? Well, aren't you all lucky that I'm not the GM, because David Stearns dodged a bullet by not signing Profar, because he has hit the he's been suspended. It's like, what's that? The reserve list? Whatever you want to call it. He was suspended for PEDs. He was caught with a masking agent that covers up steroids, and now he is out for 80 games and ineligible to return to be part of the playoff roster if the Braves make it to the playoffs. All of a sudden, what was a platoon between Jared Kelenic and Brian De La Cruz in right field has turned into both of those guys having to play the outfield until Ronald Acuna Jr. gets back. This lineup is definitely going to be waiting anxiously for his return. Meanwhile, Ronaldo Lopez has to have shoulder surgery. He has to get a scope to clean out some issues with his shoulder. He could be back this year. The expectation is he will still pitch, but when? When will he be back from shoulder surgery? That's going to be a big question for this rotation, because in the meantime, Bryce Elder is up. Suddenly, Bryce Elder is part of this rotation again, and he did not look good at all last year. I don't believe he looked very good in spring training either. This Braves rotation is now Chris Sale, Spencer Schwellenbach. Those are the two guys that you like. Grant Holmes, who was a reliever last year and is trying to be a starting pitcher this year. AJ Smith-Shawver, a prospect, or at one point a top prospect for the Braves, who has a lot of potential but has yet to put it together at the big league level. Part of that is a lack of opportunity, so maybe this is his chance to break out. Bryce Elder, as I mentioned, and Spencer Strider is expected back in May. Now, we can't count the Braves out. It's early. Even if they start 0-7, they're going to come home, face the Marlins. They might get a couple wins there. They certainly have the hitters still in that lineup with Albies, Olsen, Riley, Ozuna, Michael Harris II, Drake Baldwin, their top prospect, who is their starting catcher right now until Sean Murphy returns. He's hit into some really bad luck this year. I think he's had 2 home runs that have been robbed. So he is certainly a bat that can help that lineup. I think they'll hit. I'm actually more, if I was a Braves fan, but just as someone that covers baseball, I'd be more concerned looking at that Braves rotation now that Ronaldo Lopez is out and wondering how they're going to get by. But they are in a bad spot, and it just puts in perspective the issues the Mets are having right now. Yes, Sean Manaea had a setback, but you know what? The Mets did a great job building out depth, and they still have 5 quality, viable big league starters. You look at the Braves right now, and Holmes, Shawver, and Elder, none of them have proven yet at this point in their careers that they can be a viable big league starting pitcher. Could AJ Smith-Shawver be way better than Griffin Canning and Tyler McGill? Absolutely, but he's got to prove it. Could Grant Holmes transition to the rotation just as well as Clay Holmes? Absolutely, but we'll see which Holmes ends up being better. I bet on the Mets. Ultimately, the Braves have so much talent that they can continue to get dealt tough blows and find their way through it. But this is a team that didn't do much this offseason outside of adding Jurickson Profar. And now he's out and will be out if the Braves make the playoffs. All of a sudden, all of that preseason preview talk about the Braves were the team to beat. I think the Phillies now have moved into that role again of being the team to beat. And rightfully so. They won the division last year. But the Mets can be right there. So, yes, the lineup's got to hit a little bit more. Hopefully, those few errors are the last we see of Lindor playing sloppy defense. I would bet pretty heavily on that being the case, and he gets back to being his gold glove self. Hopefully this rotation continues to hold up and the bullpen can make a big difference. This is a Mets team that right now is in a much better spot than the Braves, and they need to take advantage of this early part in the season where they do have the ability to maybe get a little bit of a cushion in the standings and not have a slow start themselves, where they also have to pull themselves out of a hole. The Mets are positioned right now to be at the top of this division. It's early. Right now, they're more at the bottom, but that's only because the Marlins are off to a 4-2 start. I don't expect that to hold. The Phillies are 3-1 to start the season. The Nationals 1-4. and then you have the Braves at 0-6. The Mets aren't going to see the Braves, unfortunately, early in the season, because if you were going to see the Braves in April, that might be a good time to face them. They won't see them until June 17th. So we'll see where these two teams are at when they square off for the first time then. And it's part of a stretch where the Mets will play the Braves for 3 games in Atlanta. They'll play 3 in Philly, and then they'll come home and play 4 against the Braves. Hopefully at that point, these teams are healthy. Hopefully Strider and Acuna are back for the Braves, because you want to see every team get their guys back. You don't want to be rooting for injuries. And on the Mets side of things, hopefully at that point, maybe Sean Manaea is back in this rotation, as well as Frankie Montas, and we can see what the Mets truly have, in their rotation in-house before potentially having to make some tough decisions at the deadline. But for now, this division, obviously very much up in the air. We're a week into the season. Hopefully the Mets can win their first series of the season and build off of that as they will open up their season at Citi Field on Friday night. Now, on tomorrow's show, I will recap the final game of this series. Also, the Mets announced their double-head roster today. I was able to discuss that a little bit with our Locked On Mets insiders in our texting surface today. I plan on doing a little bit more of conversation on that front tomorrow. We'll see if the Mets announce their Brooklyn Cyclones roster, their St. Lucie roster, and we can really get into some minor league talk, some top prospect talk to close out this week on tomorrow's show, as well as potentially Friday's show, just going through where the Mets are at with the rest of the minor league season set to open up on Friday. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be part of our texting service and be one of our Locked On Mets insiders, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. I'm talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.